To discuss more on what President Moon had to say today, we have with us Professor Kim Hyun-wook from the Korea National Diplomatic Academy. It's good to have you on the show today.
Thank you.
So President Moon gave this New Year's press conference at the start of his third calendar year in office, and it's been a very eventful year in inter-Korean affairs over the last year or so, especially, everything that happened with the inter-Korean summits and the U.S. North Korea summit. And now he's giving this press conference talking about the year ahead. Overall, what did you make of what he had to say today?
On the issue of foreign policies, I think it's a very good timing for him to deliver speech, which means that Kim Jong-un just finished his visit to China. And I think it's almost time for us to expect the U.S.-North Korea summit soon. Maybe I think it will happen sometime around March, April, hopefully. So first thing that the President Moon Jae-in focused and emphasized in his speech was peace, which has been initiated by South Korea. So I think the role of South Korea, I think he thinks that would be very important even in the year 2019. Another point that I think was important in his speech was that, possible North Korea-U.S. summit, by which I think, he delivered that the more specific things would be agreed, which will be a good basis for further momentum in this year for the Korean Peninsula issues to the end point of the permanent peace regime in the Korean Peninsula. Another thing I heard very interesting was his focus on the U.S.-UK alliance, which he emphasized that would be very irrelevant to the current denuclearization issues, something that should be determined by the U.S. and ROK, not by other external factors.
Let's look at some of the things you've mentioned here, like piece by piece as well. So this press conference is interesting as well because it comes right on the back of this summit between Kim Jong-un and Chinese President Xi Jinping. And when asked about this, President Moon said he actually thinks, this signals that the fact that the U.S. North Korea summit is getting nearer because it seems they might have discussed what was going to be discussed in that summit. I mean, what do you think, though, he revealed that he hoped for that Kim Jong-un and Xi Jinping talked about in Beijing over the last few days?
The current Chinese, attitude towards the Korean Peninsula is first, there should be denuclearization as a prerequisite for the endpoint of the permanent peace regime in the Korean Peninsula. So China, I think Xi Jinping might have pushed Kim Jong-un for North Korea's efforts and move for denuclearization. That's the first point. And second point is that now China abides by the international community sanctions very well. So I don't think there will be any possible talks between Kim Jong-un and Xi Jinping about sanction lifting. That's something that would not have been accepted by China. Instead, I think a broader term of economic cooperation between two countries, for example, how China would contribute to the North Korea's effort for the future economic reform measures, I think that would have been some kinds of a core of the talk between two leaders this time. Another point I think would have been the Chinese position is that China should be a very important responsible player in the Korean Peninsula, which means that if there comes progress and when comes up with some time to talk about the peace regime, China should be involved in the talk. So I think these 3 points must have been the important core of the talk between two leaders when he visited China. So I think based upon that, maybe President Moon thinks that all these bases and the background conjecture about the summit meeting between Kim Jong-un and Xi Jinping would make it more hopeful for the future summit meeting between Kim Jong-un and Trump, and also some more progress afterwards.
President Moon was very optimistic about everything that's going to happen in the next year or so. But what was interesting was, well, that he said about the next summit between North Korea and the U.S. He says he hopes and expects that more details about specific denuclearization measures should or expects them to come out of this next summit. I mean, does that point to how important this next U.S. North Korea summit is, especially even to South Korea and how it wants to have relations with North Korea as well.
Yes, the Singapore summit, very historical summit, but the contents of the agreement was not very, very fruitful. Things were just focusing on what kind of important issues should be, pursued in the future, not specific agreement about two summit leaders. And afterwards, there has been stalemate between talks between two countries. So South Korean government tried a lot of things to mediate these two countries so that they can resume the talks and denuclearization and things like that. But that was not successful because their position was too far from each other. So I think at this time there should be more specific agreement so that they could come to a summit, so that afterwards more substantial progress in the Korean Peninsula would be possible. For example, if the North Korea does some substantial initial steps for denuclearization, maybe U.S. can give some important initial steps for sanction liftings. And what will be the contents of these two agenda? All that kind of things should be agreed so that they could come up with a summit meeting.
You talked there just briefly about the sanctions lifting. President Moon also said in his speech today that he will work with the international community and the US to try to work about some way to ease sanctions on North Korea, because he said, inter-Korean relations and is very important for the economy for both North Korea and South Korea as well. But he also conceded, interestingly as well, that North Korea also needs to take denuclearization steps first before he realistically believes these kinds of steps can be taken. So how difficult is South Korea's position on these matters at the moment?
U.S. position is very firm. Now, of course, President Trump wants to pursue these summits and develop two countries' relationship, but the opinion poll, elite opinions in the United States are very hardline on North Korea, and especially the U.S. Congress is very hardline on North Korea. So I don't think it's easy for the United States to lift the sanctions before North Korea does some important measures to denuclearize itself. So the only way I think that the sanctions can be lifted is to make North Korea denuclearize itself. If North Korea does some important initial steps to denuclearize itself, I think that would be the only way to lift sanctions in North Korea. So maybe I think President Moon Jae-in delivered that kind of message to North Korea already. In order for sanction lifting, in order for North-South economic cooperations, there should be denuclearization first by North Korea. So I think it's time for Kim Jong-un to make some important decision at this point, so that North Korea would be given sanction lifting and launch its economic reform policy measures.
But interestingly, in the soundbite we just heard as well from his speech, he also mentioned hopes for the Kaesong Industrial Complex and the restarting of the Mount Kumgangsan tours as well. Now, that was an issue that Kim Jong-un mentioned in his New Year's address on January 1st. What message does that send at the moment, especially as we said, sanctions lifting has to happen first before anything like this can happen, really, doesn't it?
Yes, in the New Year's speech, Kim Jong-un's message was, asking the U.S. and South Korea to lift sanctions. To the United States, it's time for the United States to lift sanctions, not North Korea. To South Korean government, just a clear message to South Korea to normalize these two things like Kumgang Mountain tourism and Kaesong Industrial Complex, regardless of international sanctions. But this is not possible under the current United Nations sanctions on North Korea. So I think at this juncture, what we need to deal with is that there should be some more efforts to bring North Korea into denuclearization, after which we can come up with some issues like this, Kumgang Mountain and Kaesong Complex. Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un in their summit meeting in September last year already agreed upon the possibility of normalizing Kumgang Mountain tourism and Gaesong Industrial Complex under the certain conditions are met. So they clearly know, and especially Kim Jong-un, I think he clearly knows that under the current international sanctions, it will be not easy. It's not possible to normalize these two things.
Late last year, there was a lot of talk about Kim Jong-un coming to Seoul, fulfilling a promise that President Moon and Kim Jong-un made in their inter-Korean summit in Pyongyang. But that didn't happen, as we all know. But today, in Moon's press conference, he's now conceded that it probably won't happen until after the U.S. and North Korea summit happens first. That's quite a change in stance over the last few months. What do you make of that, this different stance now?
If Kim Jong-un visits Seoul, the optimal scenario is to make some kind of deal with the United States first between Kim Jong-un and Trump, sanctions lifted. After that, maybe Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in can talk about some kinds of possible economic cooperations, because that kind of economic cooperation is only possible when international sanctions are lifted. That didn't happen last year. So maybe a suboptimal option would be to invite Kim Jong-un to Seoul and make that kind of North-South summit meeting as one of the important boosts for the possible summit meeting between Trump and Kim Jong-un. That was just a plan B. But I think right now, Trump-Kim Jong-un summit seems to be very possible in the future. So, why do we need to hurry? We just wait for the summit, come up with some kinds of outcome that would be, some kinds of sanction lifting included. And based upon that kinds of achievement, I think the Trump, Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un, when Kim Jong-un visits Seoul, they can talk about more widespread and possible economic cooperations between two Koreas.
We say, we can be patient, there's no rush. But at the same time, I mean, looking at President Moon's address today, there was a lot of things he talked about. He hoped for better relations and more progress with North Korea. But there was a lot of things that has to happen first, he talked about. He has to say the North Korea and U.S. have to have their summit first. He also talked about how both sides need to make concessions, and North Korea makes real steps towards denuclearization. The U.S. needs to give reciprocal measures as well. I mean, these are some of the things he talked about today. So South Korea's position in President Moon's press conference, he talks a lot, but there's very little that he can do right now, isn't there? It all depends on how the other sides go right now.
Well, I think, South Korean government, continuously, keeps contact with the United States, keeps contact with North Korea. And I think, South Korean role as mediator, I think, is still ongoing. And maybe if, Secretary Pompeo comes back to the United States from his trip to Middle East, I think possibly North Korea and the United States, they will begin their high-level talk on working level about the more detailed agenda about the summit meeting between two countries. Maybe they'll exchanges what kinds of specifics about denuclearization and sanction lifting will be filled up. I don't think it will be easy. I mean, they have to struggle and talk and more about what kind of specific content will be filled up. Maybe South Korean government also can give some, comments and advice to two countries, about the specific measures of lift sanctions. Kim Jong-un sometimes might not be satisfied about the denuclearization. U.S. would possibly demand more. So I think, kind of making these two countries satisfied with a identical, bargaining chips. I think that's one of the roles the South Korean government can do in the future.
That's where we'll have to end it today. As always, Professor Kim, thank you for coming in today.
Thank you very much.
Your thoughts.